me a sermon. So I made up my first sermon. I preached it that morning. How many like to hear this fellow tonight? Then I had to preach yet another sermon. So I had to preach that. How many like to hear this fellow all week? And they all agreed with that. So when I got through with that, then I had 1, 2, 3 all week. I had about eight sermons. Then that's when I started in tent. I'd start in with those same sermons.
Tell us a little bit about how you got started with the tent. You had an interesting beginning with that ministry.
And Andy Telford was another pal of mine. Still, he's 98 right now, still alive, but he's in Florida. But we had him for a tent meeting.
Now, about what year was this, Pastor?
That would be about 33, guessing it. And he was there for a week. And then I said, myself and another fellow pitched up and pitched in together and got the tent. And then I took the tent and I started for myself. And I began to preach those same sermons. But after I got so long a stay at a certain place, I had to move because I didn't have more sermons. I preached my sermons out, and then I moved the tent.
You were a tent evangelist, but you also tell an interesting story about how you and Dr. Luttrell found a church in the Cleveland area. Would you care to share that?
Dr. Luttrell went to the Moody Conference. They have Moody Conference every year in February, something like that. A lady said to him, and I think she lived in Painesville, Ohio, and she said, up around Painesville, Cleveland, she said, there's a church, and it's empty, and the windows are boarded up, and no one uses it. Why don't you go find out about it? So Luttrell and I were in a meeting in Painesville in a tent, and he'd preach in the morning, or he'd preach it one night, I'd lead the singing, we went off like that. So he said to me one day, Geren, let's go find that church that woman talked to me about in Chicago. And we found it. I have a picture of it in there. And it was empty, and we stood outside and prayed that God would open that up for us. So after that, I went on my way somewhere else where I was going to preach or something. Anyway, he called me up one day and he said, I got it. So he got that church opened up, and then I went there. We went there in a tent meeting. He got it opened up then. And then I was away in different, and then in the meantime, I went back in evangelistic work, and then he called me later.
And you were an associate pastor with him for about 3 years, but while you were pastoring with him, you started your own church in that area as well. Tell us a little bit about that.
While I was associate pastor with Dr. Luttrell, then there was a little church in Avon, Ohio. Not just a short drive. He said, why don't you go out there and maybe help those people on Sunday mornings? So I went out, and there was one man, and about 3 or 4, there were 2 men there. One was a janitor. There were 6 people all together, and they were trying to run it. So I'd go on a Sunday, a little more, a little more, a little more. So finally he said, well, why don't you take that church? Good idea. And so I took that church. And when it just started to build up from a half a dozen people to where you didn't have room for them, I have one picture somewhere that all of them on the side. And I stayed there for, I don't know how long, until Percy Crawford recommended me to Trenton. That's how I got in this area.
Now, you were in this church in Cleveland. It was in the mid-30s. And you tell an interesting story about a man with a rather interesting background that came and got saved. Tell us a little bit about that fellow that was related or was with the Capone gang.
Oh, yeah. Stanley Yovich. And he used to be in the Al Capone gang. And one time we were going to Fort Wayne to hear Dr. Can't think of his name. I'll get it. And we got down there, and it was he'd left. Then on our way back, I saw a sign, mission, gospel mission. So I went in, and there was a fellow up there, Charles Miller. And so when we all sat down, he said, kind of a broken English, "You got somebody to preach down there?" And they all looked at me. So he called me up, and I went and preached for him. I went on my way. And then later on, he came up to where I was at this church, had the 6 people, and he came up, and he said, I like to go in God's work. The reason he had that mission, he went to Charlie Miller, his name is Stanley Yovich, because Al Capone was after him. He's selling booze to him, white mule they call it, and this big can of it. He gave him water instead of the booze, and so he was on the run. But he stayed with me a little while. And he was down in the basement part of the church. And we would be upstairs, and you could hear him in the night praying. What a praying man he was, Stanley Yovich. So then I said, would you be willing to go where the tuberculosis people are in Phoenix, Arizona? I had just been there. Luttrell and I had been out there preaching. He said, I go anywhere God wants me, and when God can't use me, I want him to kill me. That was his vocabulary. And so we fixed him up, and we didn't have money, but what money we had, and then he took and bought bread and toasted it. And then on the way he would buy celery and lettuce, and that's the way he got out to Phoenix, Arizona. And he preached among those people, and he was loved, and he loved those people. And in the hospital, then he went to the hospital, and he begged a nurse to find somebody who could had a language that he could talk to this man, because he couldn't interpret it. But the nurse told me that afterward. So then he died there. And the nurse wrote me a letter that when they took his clothing off, that it was just like his knees were padded, just a praying. I had his body brought back to the little church in Ohio, and we had his burial there. And as I said the other day, I looked back, I couldn't see the last car. That's how many people were.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Pastor, I'd like you to tell us a little bit about how you came east.
I came east?
Yes.
Yeah, that's true. Percy Crawford knew me, and they asked him if he knew where they could get a preacher. What's now Bible Baptist in Trenton was Church of the Open Bible. And he said, well, there's a man in Ohio, but whether he'll come or not, I don't know. You're right. So I got a letter. And the same week, I got a letter inviting me to a place in Ohio. And I said to my wife, well, I think we're going to go to New Jersey. And she said, just like that, huh? I said, yeah, just like that, we're going to go. So we came, and came for a Sunday weekend and preached, and then I went back, and then they called me.
Now this was about 1940.
Yeah, 42, right 42? In there. Okay. Yeah. So, but I always wanted, and while I was in Cleveland or in Avon, I still had my mind on something like this. And I had looked at a building on Lake Erie, and I was about ready to see if I could get it when Percy had made that, and I came here. But I still wanted. I wasn't satisfied just to preach 2 sermons on Sunday and go home and call on the sick people and like that. I wasn't satisfied with that, because I thought of kids, and maybe I've always said maybe the reason I do that or did that. I like to hear kids singing. I like to hear them yelling and screaming and like that, was because I didn't have a childhood. I think of that often. And so then I saw this place, or advertised.
Now, about what year was this advertised?
This would be in 40, 47, 46, 47. Yeah, because I bought it in 46 of December. You know, so. And I saw that, and Chuck Zolker's brother was with me that morning and talked about it.
Now, where did you see this advertised? Was it in the paper?
In the Trenton, yeah, in the one of the papers, Trenton Times.
Okay.
I looked this over, and I said to Chuck's brother, Chuck Zolker's brother, take a ride with me. He said, where are we going? I said, Chesterfield. He said, where's Chesterfield? I said, I don't know. We looked it up. And when I rode by here, I could just see the top, about that much of the top of the sign that says for sale, just about that much. Weeds were that high, all over the place. Is that right? And it was in terrible shape. I kept chickens up here, right here. So we rode by here, and I stopped, and I saw it, and then I asked, that fellow was here, and I asked him about it. Was for sale, and I guess he had a lineup with it, an agreement with those people that owned it, that he could have sold it to me, really. But anyway, I went to prison, I think. But anyway, I got with the people who owned it, and I got with there. I didn't have any money. But I always say, if you know God's moving you, you don't have to worry about the money part. You just worry about God doing it for you. And that's always been my motto. But I talked to her, and I saw what I wanted, and then I bought it. 6,900 with, I forgot how there's 5 acres or 10 acres of ground. But it was a dump. I don't know how many years, weeds were all up, and the tree limbs are clear down to the bottom, so you know it's been a long time.
Now, you had an interesting story in how you got the deposit. Tell us a little bit about that.
All right, that I knew my sister-in-law had some money in the bank, and I said to her, June, I need a little money. She gave me her bank book, and I paid $300 down on it, and that sealed it. And then I was supposed to have a settling in such time, and I was supposed to pay $1,500. So she said, well, we're supposed to settle Thursday. I said, make it Friday. I don't know why I said it. Anyway, I telephoned Harrod's, my wife's father. I said, I need $1,400 right away. Or 15, whatever it was. And I knew he had sold a house in Painesville, Ohio, and I knew he had some money. So he, next morning I had it. So I laid it down as if I just had it all the time. And then I was supposed to pay $500 every 3 months or whatever. So I came to make the payment. They said, well, you're having it tough. So why don't you skip this one? So I skipped that one. The next time I was supposed to pay, skip that one. Next time I come to pay, said, go see our lawyer.